The HOA board had decided to tear up our entire street. No warning, no notice. Just a maze of ripped asphalt and construction cones stretching past every driveway. Cars trapped, sidewalks gone. Mailboxes buried under piles of gravel. They said it was for necessary repairs. But no one had approved it. No vote, no discussion. Just a few board members with clipboards, barking orders while neighbors stood helplessly in their own yards. By day 2, the street looked like a war zone. Residents couldn't park. Kids couldn't bike. Delivery trucks turned around in frustration. And then came the real danger, when a house caught fire at the end of the block. Flames rising, smoke twisting into the sky, and fire crews racing to help, only to slam to a stop at the entrance of our torn-up street. The road was blocked. There was no way in, no way out. That's when the board froze, literally stood there, watching in silence, as every second ticked to our disaster. Because the truth about what they'd done was far worse than anyone realized. And when the smoke cleared, their power and their secret began to unravel. When I first moved into Maple Glen Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down. Rows of tidy brick homes lined quiet cul-de-sacs. Children played tag on freshly cut lawns, and the evenings always smelled faintly of barbecue and jasmine. It was the kind of neighborhood that made you think of safety, order, and simple peace, the kind where people waved as they passed and lawn signs boasted about community pride. My husband and I had saved 4 years to buy that house, a modest 2-story with blue shutters and a white porch swing that creaked just enough to sound comforting. The HOA pamphlet we'd received at closing promised structured harmony and maintained beauty. I took it as reassurance. After all, a few simple rules about lawn care and trash bins didn't sound too bad in exchange for a neighborhood that always looked clean and well. Our first few months were everything we'd hoped for. Neighbors brought over peas. The local kids sold lemonade at the corner, and the community park was always full on Sunday afternoons. Even the HOA seemed friendly at first. Newsletters about block parties, reminders for seasonal decor contests, and friendly notes about keeping up the curb appeal. It felt like everyone genuinely cared about where they lived. But I should have noticed the cracks sooner. The first sign came when a new resident, Mrs. Keller, planted sunflowers along the edge of her driveway. Within days, she received a formal notice from the HOA claiming her flowers were not uniform with the neighborhood aesthetic. I remember watching her stand there in her garden gloves, confused and embarrassed, as she slowly pulled up every bright yellow bloom. She smiled weakly when she caught me looking, but there was sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes when you realize something beautiful isn't welcome where it should be. Then there was the incident with the basketball hoop. The Johnson kids had installed one in their driveway for summer break. It lasted less than 2 weeks before the HOA demanded it be removed for disrupting the visual symmetry of the street. Their father argued, politely at first, then firmly, but the board sent warning letters, each one harsher than the last, until the hoop was gone. After that, the Johnsons stopped attending community picnics. Still, I told myself these were isolated things. Small misunderstandings. Not a pattern. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves when you're not looking for them. Over time, I noticed the same few people at the center of every decision. 3 board members, always together, always whispering during meetings, who seemed to wield more control than the rest of us realized. Their names appeared in every HOA update. Marjorie, the president, known for her immaculate hedges and her sharp tongue. Todd, her second-in-command, who ran a local construction company. And Elaine, the secretary, who documented every word anyone said at meetings as if she were recording evidence for a trial. They had a way of making rules sound like community improvements. A new regulation about mailbox colors, a fine for leaving recycling bins visible from the street, a ban on certain kinds of garden lights because they distracted passing drivers. Every change came wrapped in polite language, but the effect was the same. Control tightened, bit by bit, until people learned to stop questioning. Then came the street. Maple Glen had one main road that looped around the neighborhood Willowbend Drive, and it was old, but functional. A few cracks, some faded paint, but nothing that ever caused trouble, at least Not until Todd mentioned at a meeting that the integrity of the pavement was a growing concern. He proposed a temporary reconstruction project, fully managed by his own company, to improve drainage and appearance. Some of us raised eyebrows. A few neighbors quietly asked if bids would be opened for other contractors, but Marjorie dismissed the idea with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We trust Todd," she said. "He knows this community best." And just like that, it was approved. No vote, no formal notice, just a line buried in the next newsletter. Scheduled maintenance roadway enhancement for Willowbend Drive, beginning soon. Soon turned out to mean 2 weeks later, on a Monday morning, when heavy trucks appeared before dawn and tore into the asphalt like it was a demolition site. At first, I thought maybe it would be quick, a few days of inconvenience, and then smooth new pavement. But by the third day, it became clear something was wrong. The street wasn't just being entire sections were being ripped out. Driveways barricaded with cones and metal signs, chunks of old asphalt piled against mail. It looked more like a construction zone than a residential area. And the worst part, no one could leave. Cars were trapped in garages, delivery trucks couldn't pass, and when residents asked the workers how long it would take, they shrugged and pointed toward Todd's white pickup parked near the end of the block. That's when frustration started bubbling up, the kind that makes ordinary people realize how powerless they are under the wrong kind of authority. Meetings were called, but the board refused to take responsibility. Marjorie stood in front of a crowd of furious homeowners one evening, insisting the project was necessary for safety compliance and that temporary access restrictions were unavoidable. Her tone was calm, rehearsed, but her words were empty. We all knew it. Behind me, someone muttered, "She's not fixing the street. She's testing how far she can go." And maybe that's exactly what it was. Because over the next week, things spiraled. Elderly residents couldn't get out for medical appointments. Families had to park blocks away and carry groceries home through torn-up gravel. Even mail delivery stopped because trucks couldn't navigate the mess. Every complaint was met with the same response. "We appreciate your patience. The HOA is ensuring long-term improvements." But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. It was a dry afternoon in late June, the kind where the air hums with heat. I was sitting on my porch, watching dust swirl around the barricades, when I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. At first, I thought they were just passing by, but the wail grew louder, closer, until I saw black smoke rising at the far end of the street. A house was on fire. I remember the panicked neighbors running, shouting, phones in hand. We could see the flames licking at the roof, smoke curling like a storm cloud above the trees. Within minutes, fire trucks appeared at the entrance to Willowbend Drive, and then stopped. The road was gone, torn up, blocked by machinery and debris. There was no way in. From where I stood, I could see the fire crews gesturing frantically, trying to find an alternate path. But every entrance to our street had been destroyed in the repairs. Time stretched. The air felt heavier with every passing second. And amid the chaos, I saw Marjorie standing with Todd in a lane near the barricades, pale-faced, frozen in disbelief. That was the moment everything changed. The fire was contained eventually, but the damage was done to the house, to the trust, and to the illusion that our HOA had control. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. But the board went silent. Emails unanswered, meetings postponed. It was as if they hoped the smoke would carry away the truth. But truth has a way of settling in the cracks. And this one ran deep, because soon after, documents began circulating, permits that didn't exist, invoices that didn't add up, contracts with signatures no one remembered signing. Whispers spread that Todd's company had billed the HOA for far more than the project should be cost, and that the repairs were part of something else entirely. Something that was never meant to be seen. And as I stood there, on the edge of that torn-up street, looking at the blackened remains of my neighbor's home, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the fire wasn't just an accident? What if it was the consequence of an HOA's arrogance, and the secret they'd buried right beneath our feet? Because in Maple Glen Estates, power wasn't maintained through fairness or trust, it was enforced through silence. And soon, that silence was about to break. At first, it seemed like the fire had shaken everyone awake. Neighbors who once kept to themselves began to talk openly about what had happened: the barricades, the blocked road, the strange construction schedule that no one had approved. For a brief moment, it felt like the fear that had ruled Maple Glen Estates was cracking. People were angry, confused, ready to demand answers. But that's when the letters started arriving. They came quietly, tucked inside mailboxes the very next week. Official notices printed on glossy each one began the same way. This is a reminder of your obligations as a member of the Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association. Fines for lawn overgrowth, warnings for improper trash bin placement, notices for unauthorized exterior modifications. It didn't matter how spotless a yard was. If you had spoken up, you got one. The message was clear: compliance or consequences. It was retaliation, wrapped in bureaucracy. The morning I received mine, I stood at my kitchen counter reading the words over and over, hardly believing it. Failure to resolve this violation within 7 days will result in further action. My so-called violation: paint discoloration on front trim. The trim that had just been repainted last month. It was absurd, but that didn't matter. The HOA didn't need to be right. They just needed to be loud. Across the street, I watched Mrs. Keller get her own letter. She looked down at it, shook her head, and walked back inside with slumped shoulders. A week later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. That's when I realized what was happening. They weren't protecting the neighborhood anymore. They were purging it. Every person who had questioned the street project, who had attended that chaotic meeting after the fire, they were being targeted one by one. Some gave up and paid their fines. Others packed up quietly, unwilling to fight. The community that once felt so alive now felt like a stage set, perfect lawns masking fear. But silence has a limit. The night that changed everything came 2 weeks later. I was woken by the low rumble of engines outside my window. Peeking through the blinds, I saw 2 trucks parked at the torn-up section of Willowbend Drive. It was past midnight. No construction lights, no workers in reflective vests, just silhouettes moving in the dark. I slipped on shoes, stepped out onto the porch, and listened. Shovels, metal striking dirt. Then the hollow echo of something being buried. For a long moment, I thought about turning back inside. Pretend I hadn't seen it. Pretend it wasn't happening. But curiosity, or maybe anger, rooted me to the spot. One of the men looked familiar. The sloped shoulders, the posture taut, and beside him, Marjorie, clipboard in hand, even in the middle of the night. She was directing them like a general on a battlefield. I couldn't see what they were burying, but the way they kept looking around, the urgency in their movements, it wasn't part of any repair. I grabbed my phone and took a photo through the blinds. Just one. The flash nearly gave me away, but they didn't notice. My hands shook as I watched them finish and drive off. The next morning, there was no sign of what I'd seen. The soil had been smoothed over, covered with gravel, as if nothing had ever been disturbed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was now lying beneath that street. Something they didn't want anyone to find. By the following week, the HOA escalated its campaign. Residents started receiving known compliance notices for things that didn't even make sense. A neighbor was fined for a non-standard shade of driveway, concrete. Another was accused of overuse of decorative lighting. Some were told to repaint fences that weren't even visible from the road. It was chaos, deliberate and exhausting. Meetings became theater. Marjorie stood at the front of the clubhouse like a queen defending her throne, using polished phrases to shut down dissent. The board's actions are in the best interest of our community. Certain complaints are being exaggerated by individuals who don't understand HOA processes. Every challenge ended the same way: silence. But not everyone stayed silent. One evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Henry, one of the older residents who'd lived here since the neighborhood was first built. He was soft-spoken, the kind of man who mowed his lawn in straight lines and waved at everyone, but now his face was tense. "They're hiding something," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "That night you saw the trucks. I saw them too, and I think I know what they were doing." He told me he used to be a civil engineer before retirement. The construction, he said, didn't match any standard repair pattern. The trenches were too deep. The material they used wasn't meant for residential roads. They weren't fixing drainage, he said. They were laying something. What kind of something? I asked. He hesitated. Piping, maybe. Gas lines. Or fiber. But not city approved. I checked the permits. There are none. Whatever it is, it's off the books. My heart sank. It made sense. Todd's construction company had full access. He could do anything under the guise of repairs. And if they'd buried something dangerous. That night, I went back through the photos on my phone. I zoomed in on the one from that night. The grainy image showed the edge of a metal cylinder, half lowered into the trench. It wasn't a gas line, I recognized. It looked industrial, sealed, heavy-duty. The next day, I tried to bring it up at the HOA meeting. Marjorie's eyes snapped toward me before I'd even finished my sentence. "This is not an appropriate topic for open discussion," she said coldly. "Any questions regarding the construction project should be submitted in writing to the board." "I already did," I said. 3 times. Her lips tightened. "Then perhaps you didn't fill out the right form." Laughter rippled from a few of her supporters. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The meeting moved on, and when it ended, I noticed Todd standing near the exit, watching me as I left. That night, a new notice appeared taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized recording of HOA activities. The fine $500 that was the beginning of their harassment campaign. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing strange things. A car idling near my house late at night. HOA volunteers inspecting my yard almost daily. Once, someone even came onto my porch and left a folded note that said, "You're creating division. Let it go." But I couldn't let it go. Henry and I began digging deeper, figuratively, not literally, into the HOS financial records. He managed to get copies of old budgets and invoices. At first, everything looked routine. Maintenance fees, landscaping, minor repairs. But then we found it a line item labeled Infrastructure Enhancement, Phase 1. No explanation. No breakdown. Just a lump sum. $186,000. "That's the project," Henry whispered. "But look at this. It's paid directly to Todd's company, with no competing bids. And below it, another payment, smaller but more suspicious. $12,400, administrative consulting, external, paid to a firm that didn't exist." I looked up the address. It led to a P.O. box registered under Marjorie S. maiden name. That's when the fear shifted into resolve. We started documenting everything. Letters, fines, financial statements, meeting transcripts. We backed up files, took photos, printed duplicates. Henry even stored copies in a safety deposit box. Because by then, we knew the HOA wasn't just abusing power. They were hiding a crime. Then something happened that made it impossible to ignore. A few nights later, Henry's house was vandalized. His car tires slashed. His porch light shattered. A message spray-painted across his garage door. "Stop digging." He called the police, but they shrugged it off as neighborhood mischief. No arrests, no investigation. The HOA even sent him a violation letter the next day for property damage visible from the street. That was when the fear in Maple Glen turned into paranoia. Neighbors started whispering again. This time, not about rumors, but about safety. Someone's sprinklers had been mysteriously turned off, killing their lawn. Another resident found their mailbox pried open. A woman reported hearing someone at her back gate at night. Everyone suspected the same thing, but no one dared say it out loud. The HOA was watching, and through it all, the street remained unfinished. The gravel turned to mud every time it rained. Kids slipped on loose stones, and delivery drivers avoided it entirely. But no one was allowed to complain. Until one day, a utility worker showed up. He wasn't from Todd's crew. His uniform had the city's logo. He parked his truck near the corner and started taking photos of the road, measuring something with a metal probe. I went out to ask what he was doing. "Routine inspection," he said. We got an anonymous tip about unregistered gas lines under this block. My stomach dropped. So there are lines under there. He hesitated, glanced at the torn-up section. There shouldn't be. Before I could ask more, a black SUV pulled up. Marjorie stepped out, smiling too widely. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked sweetly. The man frowned. "Just doing a safety check, ma'am." "Well, this area is private property under HOA jurisdiction," she said. "You'll need to coordinate any inspections through our board." He looked at her, then back at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Right," he said. "I'll make a note of that." And just like that, he left. 2 days later, the section of road he'd inspected was paved over, fast, overnight, smoother than the rest. It was as if the HOA wanted to bury whatever had been there, permanently. Henry and I knew we were running out of time. The longer we waited, the deeper they'd bury the truth, literally and figuratively. But then, Henry disappeared. He didn't show up to our usual Sunday coffee. I called, no answer. I went by his house. The curtains were drawn, mailbox overflowing. I felt the first real stab of fear. That evening, I found out from another neighbor that Henry had decided to move suddenly. The HOA had posted a notice on his door announcing a change of occupancy. I knew that wasn't true. Henry wouldn't just leave without telling me. Something had happened, and when I checked my porch the next morning, there was another envelope waiting, no name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line written in shaky handwriting. "They know what we found. Be careful." That was the moment I realized how far they were willing to go to protect themselves. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, they were dangerous. But fear only holds power when you let it. So, I made a decision. If they wanted silence, they were going to get the opposite. I would bring the truth into the open, where they couldn't bury it anymore. I started preparing everything. The photos, the invoices, the buried payment records. I was ready to show it all at the next HOA meeting, in front of every homeowner. But what I didn't know was that they were already planning to stop me, because the night before that meeting, something happened that would turn the quiet tension of our neighborhood into full-blown chaos and expose the buried secret once and for all. The moment that would finally shatter Maple Glen's perfect illusion and force everyone to see what the HOA had truly done beneath our street. I didn't sleep the night before the inspection. My house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Every sound, the ticking clock, the creak of the walls, the hum of the refrigerator felt amplified, as if the entire world was holding its breath. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, compiling documents, and now it all came down to this one morning. Either I was going to prove that the HOA had crossed the line, or I was going to lose everything trying. The city inspector was scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. I had emailed him everything: the photos, the invoices, the strange permits, the payment trail that led back to Marjorie's fake consulting firm. To my surprise, he hadn't dismissed it. He'd written back one short line: "This warrants an on-site review." I was still half-dressed when I heard the knock on my door. He introduced himself as Inspector Rhodes, Tall.com, the kind of man who didn't waste words. He glanced down Willowbend Drive and let out a low whistle. "Looks like you've had quite a project here," he said. "You could call it that," I replied. We walked together toward the newly paved section, the same one Todd's crew had rushed to finish after the utility worker's visit. The asphalt was unnaturally smooth, darker than the rest of the street. I pointed to it. "That's where they worked that night. No permits, no approval." Rhodes crouched, ran a gloved hand along the edge. "Fresh. Maybe 3 weeks old." He tapped it with a metal rod and listened. The sound was wrong, dull and hollow, not solid. He looked at me, eyebrows narrowing. "Something's under there." Before I could speak, the rumble of an engine interrupted us. A white pickup truck turned the corner. Todd's truck. He parked at the far end, slammed his door, and started walking toward us with that tight smile he always wore when he thought he was in control. "Morning," he said. "Can I ask what's going on here?" Rhodes straightened. City inspection. We received a report of unregistered underground installations. Todd's smile flickered. That's a misunderstanding. Private property, managed under the HOA. You'll need to go through the board for authorization. Rhodes shook his head. You're mistaken. If there's an underground line running under a public access street, it's under city jurisdiction. Todd's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but then he simply turned and walked away, pulling out his phone. Rhodes looked at me. You should step back. He called for a secondary crew. A small utility van arrived 20 minutes later, equipped with ground-penetrating scanners. As they rolled the equipment over the pavement, a faint hum filled the air. A monitor on the side of the van began to light up with colorful bands and lines. One of the technicians frowned. There's definitely a metallic structure down there, he said. About 2.5 feet deep. Runs the entire length of the block. Any idea what it is? I asked. He hesitated. Could be piping, but the density reading it's thicker than standard gas or water lines. Rhodes motioned for them to mark the area. Within minutes, the smooth asphalt was covered in bright orange spray paint, zigzagging across the road like a warning sign. He stepped back, arms crossed. We'll need to excavate a small section. If it's unregistered infrastructure, it's a violation of state law. Todd returned moments later, and he wasn't alone. Marjorie and Elaine trailed behind him, dressed as if they were attending a board meeting rather than facing a legal inspection. Marjorie's heels clicked sharply against the pavement. What exactly do you think you're doing? She demanded. Investigating, Rhodes said evenly. This is harassment, she snapped. You have no right to. Rhodes held up a hand. Ma'am, this is a city matter. If you have permits for underground work, present them now. Marjorie's mouth opened, then closed again. Her confidence cracked for just a moment. Our contractor handled all documentation, she said finally, glancing toward Todd. Rhodes turned to him. Then you can produce it. Todd's face was stone. They're on file, he said. Where? With the HOA office. Rhodes took out a clipboard. Then you'll be fine with us confirming that. The silence that followed was the sound of a lie collapsing. When the crew began drilling into the pavement, Marjorie's composure faltered completely. She whispered furiously to Todd, her face pale. Elaine stood back, gripping her binder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Within minutes, the drill hit metal sparks flared. Then the whir of the blade stopped. The crew cleared debris, revealing a thick, silver-gray pipe. But it wasn't a standard utility line. It was encased in insulation, capped on both ends, and stamped with faded industrial markings. Rhodes leaned closer. That's not municipal. Todd stepped forward. It's drainage. No, Rhodes interrupted. It's not. He turned to the technician. Get me a photo and run a trace on that serial number. While they worked, Marjorie pulled out her phone, pacing. I caught bits of her voice: overreach, lawsuit, unauthorized. But the panic in her tone betrayed her words. For the first time, she wasn't in control. After nearly an hour, the technician approached Rhodes and handed him a tablet. Sir, we found something! Rhodes scrolled through the data, his expression darkening. This material's not even registered for residential use. It's classified industrial piping, the kind used for gas storage or transfer. He looked up at Todd. You installed this? Todd hesitated, but his silence said enough. Do you realize what this means? Rhodes asked. You could have put an entire block at risk. One spark, one leak. That's enough. Marjorie cut in sharply. We'll handle this internally. Rhodes faced her. You won't. This is now a criminal matter. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For years, Marjorie had spoken like her word was law, but in that moment, the law she'd twisted finally turned on her. The news spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, word of the illegal installation reached every corner of Maple Glen. Neighbors poured out of their houses, whispering, pointing, recording on their phones. The street, once a symbol of control, was now a scene of exposure. Police arrived next, followed by a fire safety team. They cordoned off the area, warning residents to stay clear. The once pristine image of the HOA board members now looked fragile under the flashing red and blue lights. Marjorie tried to regain control, ordering the board to remain silent and cooperate strategically. But Todd was already unraveling. When investigators began questioning him, his answers came out fractured. Finally, he blurted, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." That sentence changed everything. It took less than 2 hours for the city to order a full excavation of the street. Crews arrived with heavy machinery, and as the sun began to set, they peeled back the asphalt layer by layer. Beneath it lay not one, but 2 parallel lines of metal piping, both connected to sealed junction boxes. One bore the faint markings of a decommissioned industrial gas line rerouted illegally. The other was an unlicensed fiber conduit, traced back to a private company registered under Todd's name. Rhodes looked at me grimly. "They've been profiting off this neighborhood, using HOA funds to install private infrastructure on public land in that moment." Every fine, every violation, every bit of harassment suddenly made sense. It was all a smokescreen, distractions, and intimidation to keep residents too scared to look closer. When the investigators unearthed the junction boxes, one of them found a bundle of documents sealed in plastic. Inside, payment records, signed authorizations, and forged signatures from supposed community votes. Rhodes laid them out on the hood of his truck. "These are falsified." I stared at the pages. My name was on one of them. My signature? Forged. Marjorie tried to argue, "This is a misunderstanding," but Rhodes had already radioed for the police supervisor. Todd broke first. As they questioned him near his truck, he cracked under pressure. "She told me to do it," he shouted, pointing at Marjorie. "She said no one would notice. Said it was just temporary." The words cut through the chaos like a blade. Neighbors gasped. Cameras clicked. Marjorie's face turned pale, her mask of authority melting into disbelief. "You liar," she hissed. "You were in on it." Rhodes stepped between them. "Double quotes enough. Both of you, step aside." For years, Marjorie had controlled every narrative, every rumor, every whisper in Maple Glen. But this wasn't a meeting she could adjourn. This was real accountability, and it was happening in front of everyone. By nightfall, the street looked like a crime scene. Floodlights illuminated the open trenches. Officers moved in and out, collecting evidence, and neighbors stood in clusters, talking in low voices. The same people who once nodded obediently at Marjorie now watched her like strangers. I stood at the edge of it all, numb. Vindicated, maybe, but also shaken. I had wanted the truth, and now it was here, ugly and undeniable. As they loaded boxes of evidence into vans, Rhodes approached me. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I nodded, though it didn't feel like victory yet. What happens now? City safety review? Legal action? Possibly criminal charges? It'll take time. He paused, then added, "But you might have prevented something worse. That gas line could have been catastrophic." His words hit hard. All this time I'd been thinking about the fines, the fear, the control, but not the danger. They hadn't just abused power, they'd gambled with lives. The following week was chaos. News vans lined the entrance to Maple Glen Estates, their cameras trained on the torn-up street. Headlines spread online. "Illegal gas line found beneath private HOA property." Reporters dug into the HOA's finances, uncovering years of misused funds and fabricated votes, and then came the arrests. Todd was taken first, charged with illegal installation of hazardous infrastructure and fraud. Elaine was brought in for falsifying documents, but the one everyone watched for, the one we'd all been waiting for, was Marjorie. When the officers finally arrived at her immaculate home, she stepped out in silence, her perfectly pressed blazer still on, her eyes hollow. Cameras flashed as she was led to the patrol car. The same neighbor she'd once ordered around stood at their driveways, watching. No one said a word. I thought that would be the end of it. But endings aren't that simple, because a few days later, Rhodes came back with more news. "During the excavation," he said, "we found something else." He handed me a sealed evidence photo, a rusted metal box, small enough to fit in both hands. Inside, they discovered sealed envelopes, property deeds, payment records, and handwritten notes detailing secondary income streams. They'd been collecting kickbacks for years, using HOA funds to pay for illegal infrastructure, then charging private companies under the table to use it. The fire, the roadwork, all of it had been designed to cover their tracks when part of the system began to fail. The gas line wasn't an accident. It was an attempted patch-up of a collapsing secret, one that had nearly cost lives. The weight of it settled on me slowly. I'd started this thinking it was about unfair rules and intimidation, about power and pride, but it had never just been that. It was greed, corruption buried literally beneath our feet. For months afterward, the community struggled to recover. The street remained blocked off, half-dug and silent, like an open wound. But something else began to change too. People started talking again. Not whispers this time, but real conversations. About accountability, about rebuilding trust, about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to live in. I watched as new board members were elected, people who'd once been too afraid to speak up, now raising their hands to volunteer. The fear that had ruled Maple Glen was fading, replaced by something fragile but real: unity. But even then, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The sound of the jackhammers, the hollow echo of metal under the ground, the image of Marjorie standing helpless as the truth surfaced around her. Some nights, when I walk past a newly repaved road, I can still hear the faint hum of the machines that tore it open. The new asphalt looks clean, but I know what used to lie beneath, and what it took to bring it to light. Because in the end, power doesn't crumble in silence. It crumbles when the lies it's built on finally see daylight. And as the sun rises over Maple Glen now, the street looks calm again, peaceful, even. But every time I hear the distant rumble of construction somewhere else, I can't help but wonder how many other neighborhoods are still living above their own buried secrets, just waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up. For weeks after the arrests, Maple Glen didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a scar, something raw, exposed, and uncertain about how to heal. The once perfectly trimmed lawns now looked overgrown. The cul-de-sacs were quiet, the chatter gone. People who used to wave at each other now just gave small, tired nods. At first, I thought the silence was relief, but it wasn't. It was shock. We'd all lived under that HOA's shadow for so long that, when it finally collapsed, we didn't know how to move forward. Marjorie's arrest had been on every local news channel. The footage replayed over and over: the queen of control, handcuffed, walking down her front steps with her chin trembling but lifted, still trying to look dignified. Neighbors whispered that she didn't say a word during questioning. Others said she'd tried to pin everything on Todd, but the paperwork and digital trails told a different story. Every financial transaction, every permit forgery, every hidden payment, all traced back to her. When the city council released the full report, it hit us harder than we expected. The HOA had embezzled nearly $420,000 over 7 years, funds taken from residents under the guise of beautification fees, emergency repairs, and property compliance projects. A portion of those funds had been funneled into private accounts used to build and maintain that illegal infrastructure and even pay off contractors to stay silent. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a deliberate, organized scheme built on intimidation. The revelation shattered the illusion of Maple Glen's perfection. The pristine lawns, the manicured entrances, the quiet streets, all of it had been kept in line through fear, not pride. The day the HOA's official office was sealed by the city was surreal. For years, that little building by the pool had been the symbol of authority. Its windows, always spotless, its door always locked to anyone without an appointment. Now, yellow tape fluttered across the entrance, and a faded sign read "Closed pending investigation." I walked by it one evening, just as the sun dipped low, and the pool lights flickered on. The water shimmered quietly behind the fence, reflecting the empty notice board where HOA announcements once ruled like commandments. For the first time, the neighborhood felt human again. Imperfect, honest. Still, the damage ran deep. Some families put their homes up for sale within days, unwilling to stay in a place tied to scandal. Others stayed, not out of denial, but out of stubborn hope. I stayed too. I wasn't ready to leave the place I'd fought for, the place I'd risked so much to protect. The city appointed an interim administrator to help dissolve the corrupt HOA board and establish a new one through transparent elections. They invited residents to attend open meetings, real ones this time, not the staged, closed-door sessions Marjorie used to host. The first meeting was awkward, to say the least. It was held in the community clubhouse, a place we hadn't gathered in for anything other than compliance briefings and HOA rule updates. Now, folding chairs filled the room, the air thick with a mix of tension and cautious curiosity. The administrator, a calm woman named Clara Evans, stood at the front. She was patient but firm, her tone direct. "You all deserve a say in how your community is run," she said. "Tonight, we start over." It was strange, hearing those words, start over. They sounded fragile, almost naive. But as the night went on, people began to speak up. Slowly at first, tentatively, then with growing confidence. Frank from the corner lot talked about how he'd been fined for the color of his shed. Linda mentioned being threatened with eviction for planting a rosebush. The Jeffersons admitted they'd once voted yes on Marjorie's motions out of fear she'd target them if they didn't. Every story cracked open another piece of the past we'd all tried to ignore. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my palms sweating. "I don't know if I ever wanted to be the face of this mess," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But if there's one thing I learned through all this, it's that silence is its own kind of approval. And we gave them too much of it." The room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. By the end of the night, people were exchanging phone numbers, something we hadn't done in years. It felt like the first real step toward becoming a community again. Weeks passed, and Maple Glen began to change in small but meaningful ways. The new board was voted in 5 residents, none of them power-hungry, all of them painfully aware of what unchecked authority could become. They started by repealing dozens of ridiculous bylaws. No more fines for minor decorations. No more aesthetic violation notices for leaving trash cans out for an hour too long. Instead, they introduced something revolutionary for this place: transparency. Every budget posted online, every meeting recorded, every vote counted openly. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. And with time, something even more unexpected happened. People started to care again, not out of fear, but out of pride. They volunteered to repaint the fences, clean up the playground, host weekend cookouts. The same cul-de-sac that had once been filled with tension now echoed with laughter and the smell of barbecues. Still, there were reminders everywhere of what we'd survived. The stretch of road where the illegal gas line was uncovered remained under reconstruction for months. The city fenced it off, posting safety warnings. Every time I walked past it, I felt a mix of anger and gratitude. One afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, Inspector Rhodes stopped by again. He looked tired but satisfied, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "The last of the charges are finalized." I motioned for him to sit on the porch. He flipped through the folder. Todd took a plea deal, 3 years, for fraud and unlawful installation. Elaine got probation for falsifying documents. But Marjorie, he paused. "She's facing 7 felony counts: fraud, embezzlement, reckless endangerment. Her trial starts next month." I didn't say anything for a while. When I finally spoke, my voice was low. "Do you ever think she believed she was doing something wrong?" Rhodes sighed. "People like her. They convinced themselves it's for order, for structure, but control's a dangerous addiction." He was right. Marjorie had built her empire on the illusion of perfection. She didn't see herself as corrupt. She saw herself as necessary. That's what made her dangerous. After Rhodes left, I sat outside for a long time, watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. The air was calm again, but I could still feel the echoes of everything that had happened. When the trial began, the whole community followed every update. The courtroom was packed: residents, reporters, former board members, even people from neighboring HOAs who wanted to see what accountability looked like. Marjorie sat at the defense table, composed but thinner, her hair grayer. When the prosecution laid out the evidence, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the illegal infrastructure, she didn't flinch. She didn't look at anyone. But when they played the video footage of the excavation, of the pipes being uncovered, something in her cracked. For the first time, she looked small, like a person realizing that the power she clung to was gone for good. When the verdict came, guilty on all major counts, a hush filled the courtroom. No one cheered, no one gloated. We just breathed. It was over. She was sentenced to 9 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for the first 5. The judge's words still ring in my mind. Authority is not a weapon, it's a responsibility. You failed that responsibility. Afterward, the community gathered one last time, not to celebrate, but to reflect. Clara, the interim administrator, stood at the front again. This neighborhood survived something ugly, she said. But what defines you, ISNT? What broke here at S? What you built after it? Her words lingered in the air like sunlight after a storm. The following months were a quiet rebuilding period. Slowly, the neighborhood came back to life. The city replaced the torn roads, reseeded the grass, and repainted the curbs. The smell of new asphalt mixed with the faint scent of blooming jasmine, a strange but comforting combination. Children began playing outside again. The sound of laughter returned. Porch lights that had once been turned off in fear now glowed warmly at night. And for me, life began to settle into something resembling peace. I finally finished restoring my garden, the same one that had sparked the first violation notice. This time, no one complained about the color of the fence or the arrangement of the flowers. Neighbors even stopped by to compliment it, sometimes bringing seeds to add to the mix. One Saturday morning, as I was watering the hydrangeas, Mrs. Jefferson from across the street called out, "Hey, we're planning a block party next weekend. You better be there. You kind of started this whole thing." I laughed. Started or survived it? She grinned. Both. The party was simple. Burgers, music, laughter echoing off the houses. No sign-in sheets, no patrols, no passive-aggressive rule reminders. Just people. Together. At one point I looked around and realized something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. No one was looking over their shoulder anymore. No one was afraid of the HOA truck turning the corner. The tension that had once haunted every interaction was gone. For the first time in years, Maple Glen felt like home. Months turned into a year. The trial faded from headlines. The new board continued its honest work, and the neighborhood found balance. But one day, I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from Marjorie herself. It was short, handwritten, and unexpectedly personal. I've had a lot of time to think. It began, I told myself for years that I was keeping this place perfect, that I was doing what no one else had the strength to do. But I see now that control isn't the same as care. You were right to stand up. I wish I'd listened sooner. No apology could undo what she'd done, but for the first time, her words sounded human, not rehearsed, not cold. Just real. I didn't write back. Some things don't need responses, but I kept the letter folded neatly in the back of a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder, because power doesn't always look like shouting or dominance. Sometimes it looks like silence, like compliance, like the quiet belief that someone else will fix it. That's how it starts. That's how it grows. And if there's one thing Maple Glen taught me, it is that communities only survive when people care enough to speak, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous. Now, when I walk the neighborhood at sunset, I see kids playing catch near the once dug street, couples walking dogs, lights flickering softly through open curtains. Every small sound, every quiet laugh, feels like a victory. The road that was once torn apart is whole again. Smooth, safe, but I'll never forget what lay beneath it. Not just the pipes, but the lies, the fear, the buried greed. Those things nearly destroyed us, but they also revealed us, showed us who we were when faced with corruption, and who we could be once we stood together. Maple Glen isn't perfect now, and that's the best part. Because perfection was always the lie. What we have now, the laughter, the freedom, the messy gardens and imperfect lawns. That's real. That's what community is supposed to be. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint hum of the streetlights outside, and it reminds me of something Inspector Rhodes said the day they tore the road open. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. He was right. No matter how deep you hide it, no matter how tightly you pave over it, the truth always finds a way to rise. And in our little neighborhood, it did. Not with explosions, not with violence, but with voices brave enough to dig.